My name is Dean Simon. I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. I didn't intend to become an artist. I actually initially wanted to become a cartoonist or an animator. And life just took a different avenue, different route, and off I went. Art has been a major part of my life almost from day one. I'm not sure how I actually made it through school. I was always in trouble, always doodling, always sketching, always on another planet. I look at things very differently, I process things very differently. I don't see words or numbers, I see everything in pictures. I like detail, and I like being able to depict detail. The work I'm doing is called hyperrealism. You're creating a separate reality that may have existed or doesn't exist, or never will exist. Because what you're doing is you're showing with absolute clarity exactly what a thing looked like. It's almost like becoming a human camera. I've chosen to work predominantly with pencil. The immediacy of working with a pencil is, firstly, it's going straight from your fingertips onto the paper. It's immediate. You cannot, if you make a mistake, you cannot rub the whole thing out and start again. You cannot overpaint. So whatever I put onto that final piece of linen has to be exactly what it's going to be. It has to be precise. Over the past few years, I've been really bothered by a specific question that's been nagging at me. Why is it that some people live their lives in perpetual hate and blame, and other people use poverty and persecution and oppression as an excuse as to why they cannot succeed? I wanted to ask if it was true, if there really wasn't any hope. Can you not transcend it? Can you not move forward in spite of what other people do? Or do you not have your own destiny in your hands? And I started looking around. One of the first individuals I decided to focus on was Marcel Marceau. Very few people actually knew the real Marcel Marceau, what he looked like, or the story behind the man. Marcel Marceau was a young boy when the Germans occupied France. His entire family were taken away, his world was torn apart. He and his brother managed to escape, where the other members of his family were not as fortunate, all basically being exterminated in Auschwitz. He and his brother, as young boys, escaped, made their way to Paris and joined the French resistance. And instead of getting involved in the violence of what the resistance was all about, Marcel Marceau and his brother took on the role of shepherds in taking countless Jewish children out of occupied Europe to safety and freedom. Marcel Marceau taught himself to mime as a method or means of keeping the children quiet so they wouldn't be discovered. He was able to take terrified children and keep them absolutely quiet without saying a single word. And then in a world of absolute silence, by just basically using gestures and movement, he was able to keep them spellbound and basically smuggle them out, take them to safety. What really got my attention with Marcel Marceau was that here's a man who had every reason and rhyme to be bitter, to want vengeance, and to basically say to the rest of the world, go to hell. And he went the exact opposite direction. And that's what this collection is all about. People who have gone through the worst and have become the best, from hurt to hope, from darkness to light. In doing research into this project, I obviously came up with the well-known names of people who turned their backs on violence and are very, very well known. For example, Nelson Mandela, the Mahatma Gandhi, the Dalai Lama. I also wanted to include people whose actions or whose contributions may be known, but they themselves are not that well known, like Immaculée Elabagiza from Rwanda. Immaculée was 22 years old when the Hutu militias sowed their destruction across Rwanda, murdering millions of people, including Immaculee's family and friends. What's interesting about Immaculee, in spite of everything that's happened to her, she came out without seeking revenge. Her mission and her life's work has now been to help the children overcome the trauma they experience, but also to help the country reconcile. When you start to understand the psychology of hate, you start to see the similarities in the different genocides. The first step is to dehumanize. In Rwanda, the Hutus referred to the Tutsis as cockroaches. In Nazi Germany, the Germans referred to Jews as Untermensch and rats, Untermensch being subhuman.
Wo Ratten auch auftauchen, tragen sie Vernichtung ins Land. Nicht anders als die Juden unter den Menschen.
We all know that absolutely no one has a right to call anybody else an Untermensch or a subhuman. However, in Nazi Germany, all Jews, irrespective of whether it was a common peddler or one of the greatest minds, were known as subhuman. And that equally applied to some of the greatest minds of the 20th century, Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, Edward Teller, Marc Chagall, Hannah Arendt, to name a few. Now there's another question that needs to be asked. Had these people been exterminated, what would the world have lost? How do we know what psychology would have been without a Sigmund Freud? How do we know how our view of the universe would have been affected without Albert Einstein? How do we know what would have happened with different forms of energy had it not been for Edward Teller? We don't know the impact, the full impact that the Holocaust has actually had on mankind. And in the piece entitled Photographers, we see one of history's greatest ironies, where the forces of fascism that not only threatened the world but sought the destruction of the Jews, and we see the actual destruction of fascism being recorded by 4 Jewish photographers. It was a Jew, Joseph Rosenthal, who as a child of parents who had survived pogroms in Eastern Europe, went on to photograph the famous raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. It was another Jew, Robert Capa, who as a child had survived pogroms, turned to photograph American troops landing on Omaha Beach during the D-Day landings. It was Yevgeny Kalady, who also survived pogroms, who photographed the raising of the Russian flag over the Reichstag at the very time Hitler was committing suicide. Finally, it was Alfred Eisenstadt, a German Jew, who took one of the most famous iconic photographs celebrating the end of World War II. And in the image of Elie Wiesel, we see that a person can go from being a tortured teenager in a death camp like Auschwitz to a Nobel laureate as an adult. The so-called Untermensch has gone on to exemplify the very best that a human being can be. Although it doesn't always seem like it, the way of the world is that good will triumph over evil. And for this to happen, justice has to prevail. And I believe the person who best represents us was Simon Wiesenthal. Here's a man who was subject to years of terror and torment in a Nazi concentration camp. He went on to become one of the foremost Nazi hunters. And his main motivation was not revenge. It was simply that justice had to prevail for the world to see what happened and for it not to happen again. That lesson had to be learned. These people who have depicted, in spite of the worst that's been done to them, instead of them becoming bitter and twisted human beings, they've actually gone on, in spite of everything, to become the best that human beings can be, absolute icons. I think these people are teaching us that we do have a choice. That no matter what our circumstances and what our backgrounds are, we all have a choice and we all have a responsibility. We can either get trapped in a vortex of perpetual hate and blame, or we can choose to be the exact opposite. I think that's what this project is all about. I think that's what this collection is all about. And to me, I think that's what life is all about.